Welcome to Readings in the Khalidiyya, which was launched in October of 2020 as a project of the Center for Palestine Studies at Columbia University, together with the Center for the Study of Muslim Societies and the Khalidiyya Library itself in East Jerusalem. And it's also supported by the librarians at both Columbia and New York University. The Readings project was motivated by the fact that the Khalidiyya library manuscript collections had, with several other family libraries, been digitized by the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. That's HMML, which significantly enhanced the accessibility of these collections to users around the world, opening new avenues for the study of the history and intellectual life of Palestine and the wider regions. My name is Brinkley Messick, and I'm a professor at Columbia in both the Department of Anthropology and the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies. And I was among the founding faculty members for the Center for Palestine Studies. In the launch session for Readings, this project was introduced by my distinguished colleague, Rashid Khalidi, the Edward Said Professor in the History Department, and as his name indicates, a member of the library family. But recordings of the previous sessions are available on the Center for Palestine Studies website under Programming/Jerusalem. For information about the Khalidi Library itself, one may visit the library's excellent new website. For today's session, we welcome Benedikt Reier. I hope that's close enough to the correct pronunciation. Of the Center for the Study of Manuscript Cultures at the University of Hamburg. He earned his MA and PhD, the latter in 2022, from the Free University in Berlin in Middle East Studies. His dissertation was on biographical dictionaries in the Mamluk period. And I just would note that there was a period earlier in his academic training in 2010 to 2012, where he was located at Birzeit University studying Palestine and Arabic studies. His appointments to date, he's a sort of a fresh PhD, so so his appointments to date include the research associate, principal investigator, lecturer at both Hamburg and Berlin since 2021. Among some of the writings he's done up to now, there are two that are very interesting, I think. I don't know what the jihad literature is, but anyway, that's a paper he did in a journal called Crusades, the reception of jihad literature in the Crusader period. This is in 2023. It's just this year. And before that is an article called in Dar Islam in 2021, Bibliophilia in Ottoman Aleppo, Muhammad at-Takawi and his medical library. Sounds like a great thing. So today, his title is The Last Mamluk Library. And for the people who are assembled to hear this lecture, please put your questions in the Q&A for following his words. Thank you very much. Tfaddal.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to share my screen. Let's see if this works. Share screen. Stop. Can you see my screen? Oh. No? Yes, great. Okay, 1 second. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Guy, Brink, and Simon, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's a great honor to speak in this series. What I will present today is part of an ongoing research project, a project about the history of a library that was founded in early 19th century Jaffa by a local governor, namely Mohammed Acre, who's better known as Abu Nabbut. My research on this library started out as part of the al-Jazzar library project, a project of more than 20 international researchers focusing on the great and famous library of Ahmad Pasha al-Jazzar. in Acre. And the link between the library of Abu Nabbut and the library of al-Jazzar is not really a book-related one, but simply one of personal status, namely that Abu Nabbut was a manumitted military slave, a Mamluk of al-Jazzar. In the future, I will hopefully and probably manumit my research from the al-Jazzar library project frame and go beyond this initial framework and develop it into something independent. As my research on this library is ongoing, many questions remain open or unposed, and some important source material remains unseen or seen only in rather challenging digital reproductions. That being said, my research would not have been possible if it wasn't for various digitization projects for which I'm certainly very grateful. I'm very much open for suggestions and hints to further information and sources, so please feel free to contact me if you know more about Abu Nabbut's library. What I will do today is first introduce the man behind the library, Abu Nabbut. I will then present the sources for the history of his library, say something about the history and the history of its books from its foundation up until today, to finally ask what kind of library we are dealing with and what the history of this specific library can contribute to the bigger picture of book history and cultural history of Ottoman Palestine. Research on Abu Nabbut so far amounts to a highly important 1998 dissertation by Ruba Kanaan, who also published some spin-off articles focusing mostly on the architectural legacy Abu Nabbut left in Jaffa. Ruba Kanaan's research was followed by Mahmud Mosque, in whose book on the history of Jaffa and in some other spin-off articles, Abu Nabbut looms large. The library of Abu Nabbut has so far only seen one dedicated article published in 2011 by Fatima Al-Wahsh. Abu Nabbut is an obscure figure who first comes up in the sources as part of the retinue of Ahmad Pasha al-Jazzar. Al-Jazzar, in turn, is most famous for turning Acre into a trans-regional hub and is amongst others known as the founder of a very rich library with around 1,700 manuscripts. In Acre under al-Jazzar, Abu Nabbut, then mostly called Muhammad Arab, served in various positions, most importantly as the customs officer, where he certainly collected experience that came in handy later in his tenure in Jaffa. Abu Nabbut was one of the closest Mamluks of al-Jazzar, and as such, in 1803, he was sent to fight Abu Marak, the ruler of Jaffa, to incorporate it into al-Jazzar's realm. And after successfully fighting Abu Marak, Abu Nabbut became deputy governor of Mutasalim in the Mediterranean town. After al-Jazzar's death a year later in 1804, Suleiman Pasha the Just, another former Mamluk of al-Jazzar and his successor, reconfirmed Abu Nabbut's appointment as the Mutasalim of Jaffa. In addition to Jaffa, Abu Nabbut's realm included Gaza, Ramla, Lit, and also the supervision of the sultanic endowments in the region. In this position, Abu Nabbut remained for almost 2 decades. In 1819, he got kicked out of Jaffa as his political ambitions, more precisely his drive to rule Jaffa and environs independently, became too obvious and threatening for his superior, Suleiman Pasha. The most important achievement of Abu Nabbut's tenure in Jaffa was a large-scale infrastructural project which included the expansion of the town's military, economic, and religious infrastructure. Amongst others, he reinforced the town's city walls and built a second one. He dug a moat, he built khans, markets, and he built public fountains. The religious signature project of his endeavor was the Great Mosque, also known as the Mahmudi Mosque. Within this mosque, he built a madrasa as well as a library that is at the heart of today's lecture. In April 1812, the construction of this mosque madrasa library compound was officially finished and opened for the public. Abu Nabbut backed this big project up with the formation of an endowment complex, a waqf, which was meant to fund his enterprise and to give him, as the supervisor of the endowment, long-lasting influence. And indeed, we have evidence for him exerting influence long after he was expelled from Jaffa. In addition to an existing waqf that was established to run the old ruinous mosque on which the Great Mosque was built, Abu Nabbut added 7 shops, a khan with 7 stores, a house with plenty rooms, and 7 water mills in the vicinity of Jaffa. Now, after this brief biographical sketch, I will now turn to the sources we have specifically for his library. Our first source on Abu Nabbut's library is a multiple document manuscript with copies of endowment-related documents. We second have a library inventory from the court records of Jaffa, and third, we have some of the books that once were part and parcel of the library. Now, the multiple document manuscript is a copy of 7 separate endowment documents. It was produced by an unknown scribe who copied down each document in its Arabic version, as registered in the Islamic Court of Jerusalem, and in its Ottoman Turkish version, as registered in the Al-Haramain al-Sharifain in Istanbul. This multiple document manuscript provides some general insights in the organization of the endowment complex as intended by its founder Abu Nabbut, as well as later additions and financial arrangements. For the library more specific, it provides detail about its funding, its staff, and its embeddedness in the madrasa of the Great Mosque. The second most important source is a library inventory that was drawn up in 1830, that is roughly a year after the library was officially founded. It can be found in the records of the Islamic court, the Sijilat of Jaffa. In contrast to the court records from Jerusalem, which survived virtually with no major break from the early 16th century, there are no court records from Jaffa prior to the French invasion of 1799. In the third volume of the Jaffa Sijilat, an inventory of books that were then present in the library can be found. Now, there are several open questions regarding this inventory. For example, I am so far not sure why exactly this inventory was drawn up. There's a short preamble which simply states that it is a daftar. Most probably it was drawn up as a survey. And the wording is not really very rich in detail, it only says it's a dabt ma huwa mawjood. Now the second main question is about the number of books listed in the inventory. The closing protocol provides a number, but this number does not coincide with the number of books listed in the inventory. The inventory is thus most probably only a fragment, but the challenging reproductions I'm working on do not allow me to speculate on that issue any further. More interesting for our case, the closing protocol provides the name of the then acting librarian and mentions that there was a library catalog, which unfortunately remains unfound. Both sources, the multiple document manuscript and the inventory, have been used in studies on Jaffa under Abu Nabbut, most extensively by Kanaan, who edited the multiple document manuscript in her PhD thesis on Jaffa under Abu Nabbut. Parts of the inventory form the basis of Fatima Al-Wahsh 2011 article. The third and final source are the books themselves. So far, this crucial source remained unused in the writing of the history of this library. I've compiled a corpus of 146 books that once stood or laid on the shelves of Abu Nabbut's library. I will come back to this Abu Nabbut manuscript corpus towards the end of my lecture, and just briefly want to say here that I was able to ascertain their former status as being part of Abu Nabbut's library thanks to their various endowment notes. Here are some examples of these notes, and we can see that they vary in size, in detail, in wording, and in script. They are, compared to the note and the stamp on al-Jazzar's books, more diverse, and this initially made it harder to understand that they actually all belong to a single library. But all of them have his name in one of its variants, Muhammad Ara, Abu Nabbut, or Abu Labbut, as the endower, and most of them also mention the library of the Great Mosque as the location where the books are supposed to be placed. Moreover, many of these notes are dated, and this allows us to trace the building up of the library stock over time. The manuscripts I have found so far are the ones uploaded on the library website of the Al-Najah University Library of Nablus, the ones in the Mahmudi Mosque in Gaza, a single manuscript in the National Library of Israel in Jerusalem, and some manuscripts in the Center for Heritage Revival and Islamic Research in Abu Dis, though I'm not sure if I have missed further manuscripts today housed in this very center. I will come back later in my talk to the recent whereabouts of these books. And if any one of you has ever stumbled across a manuscript formerly belonging to Abu Nabbut, please write me an email. Now let's turn to the history of the library. As I said earlier, the library was part of Abu Nabbut's large-scale infrastructural project to revitalize Jaffa after the town was devastated when Napoleon moved his forces up the Mediterranean coast in 1799. Next to the military and economic project, the building of a mosque took central stage in Abu Nabbut's attempt to develop the harbor town into a center of trade and culture. This mosque still stands today. In the northeastern corner, encircled on this map in orange, a room was assigned to house books. Now the structure on the right side here on the map are later additions which should not confuse us today. The multiple document manuscript provides us with a payroll for the staff of the compound. Specifically for the madrasa, the 2 teachers, for example, earned 15 kirsch a month, their respective assistants 10, and the students a comparatively stunning stipend of between 7 and 12 kirsch. Most interesting for our purpose, the librarian, the Amin Kutub Khane, earned only 3 kirsch a month. Now, compared to the student stipends, this was certainly a meager salary. It is reasonable to assume that the librarianship of Abu Nabbut's library was only a part-time activity, and that the librarian had to have another money-spinning job. Now it is when we triangulate the 3 sources at hand that we can get a better idea about how librarians such as the one of Abu Nabbut's library earned their living. From the multiple document manuscript, we have the salary, 3 kirsch. The inventory in the Jaffa Sigilat provides us with a name, Sheikh Mustafa at-Tarablusi. Now in one manuscript formerly part of Abu Nabbut's library, today part of the Umari Mosque in Gaza, we can find a letter reused to repair the book and today constituting a flyleaf towards the end of the book. This letter is addressed to a certain Sayyid Mustafa Effendi, who most likely is our librarian. And I think that this Mustafa Effendi is our librarian because the letter also mentions a certain Ahmad Effendi Haikal, who equally appears in the inventory of the sigil as the administrator of Abu Nabbut's headquarters in Jaffa. Now, as the letter is about the shipment of cotton and a certain headgear, it is arguably the blossoming cotton trade in the region of Nablus and beyond that was the main money-spinning occupation of our librarian. Be that as it may, unfortunately, we do not really know what his tasks were, and this is no different for the other librarians in other historical libraries. The inventory in the sigil mentions a catalogue of the library that was in the possession of at-Tarablusi, but we do not know if he produced that catalogue, if he was meant to update it, or in how far he ever employed it in his daily work in the library. Among the most elusive topics in any history of libraries is the actual use, and this is no different in our case, unfortunately. I only found one reading note in the Abu Nabbut manuscript corpus stating that the book was examined in the madrasa of the Great Mosque in Jaffa. But with only a personal name, Yusuf, we cannot really get any closer to this user of the library. The few narrative sources I have found so far are not really richer in detail. In his travelogue from 1841, Abdul Qadir Abu Saud al-Maqdisi mentions the mosques and the rooms for students, but he is silent about actual students living there, let alone the library. On one unrelated manuscript, formerly owned by the Sufi notable from Jaffa, Abu Rabah Abdul Qadir al-Dajani, we find a note from 1853 or 54, where the later states that he was the servant of knowledge, the Khadim al-Ilm, in the madrasa of the Great Mosque in Jaffa, indicating that there was at least one teaching position in the mosque in the mid-19th century. As these 3 examples show, the actual use of Abu Nabbut's library and its superordinate madrasa is and probably will remain mostly obscure. Anyways, the library was not really an impressively large one when we take a look at its stock. Here we have two numbers. The inventory in the sigil from 1813 provides us with the earliest number, 538. Almost a century later, the yearbook, the Zahlname from the year 1900, provides the number 263. For the time in between, the dated endowment notes on the manuscripts in the corpus demonstrate a steady growth of Abu Nabbut's library during the lifetime of its founder. I don't have time to delve into the growth of the stock here, but I only want to mention one interesting fact. After Abu Nabbut got kicked out of Jaffa in 1819, he continued endowing books to his library in the Mahmudi Mosque. A last cluster of 24 books entered the library stock in 1822. Maybe this is an indication that Abu Nabbut hoped to return one day and continue his legacy in Jaffa. Now, there are some indications that the library of Abu Nabbut did not attract further manuscripts after his demise. One of his successors, Mustafa Pasha As-Said, chose to endow his manuscripts rather to the Mufti of Jaffa, Hussein Salim Adajani, than to the library of the Great Mosque. This does not, however, mean that all books of the library were acquired with Abu Nabbut's own money. In the corpus, I have found two books that were bought with the money of a deceased Ahmad al-Alfi, probably a member of Abu Nabbut's household. These two books, however, are so far outliers, and we have to regard Abu Nabbut as the major contributor to the library's stock. Now, where are these books today? As I said earlier, so far I've been able to assemble a corpus of 146 manuscripts formerly part of Abu Nabbut's library. Most of these books I have found uploaded on the website of the Al-Najah University Library. Even though these reproductions are uploaded on the Al-Najah website, they are not part of the manuscript collection of the Najah University in Nablus. In fact, I have not found out about the current library setting for the majority of these manuscripts. But a stamp on almost all manuscripts uploaded on the website of the Al-Najah library provides an important indication to the 20th century history of Abu Nabbut's book. This indication is a stamp of the Islamic Library of Jaffa. The Islamic Library of Jaffa was founded in 1923 by the Supreme Muslim Council in a period that saw a massive push to preserve what we today call cultural heritage. In this process, the Supreme Muslim Council, for example, also built the Islamic Museum on the Haram al-Sharif, renovated the Al-Aqsa Library, and built other libraries across Palestine. The Islamic Library of Jaffa was annexed to the Great Mosque, built by Abu Nabbut more than a century earlier, and the books that had remained in its library, and we do not know how many these actually were, thus had to move only a short distance to the next depository. Sometime after 1948, the Islamic Library of Jaffa was dissolved. When Mahmud Ata'ala produced a catalogue of the library in the early 1980s, what he was actually working on was only a small part of it, then stored in the Nusha Mosque in Jaffa. The history and the afterlife of the Islamic Library of Jaffa is certainly a topic in need of more research. Now, between April and June 1935, a little more than a decade after the Islamic Library of Jaffa was established, some 13 manuscripts from Abu Nabbut's library made their way to Gaza, where they are stored until today in the Umari Mosque. The former librarian of the Umari Mosque library, the famous historian At-Tab'a, writes in his history of Gaza that he called upon his fellow Palestinian scholars and book collectors to contribute their books to the Umari Mosque library. Amongst others, he was successful in obtaining 13 manuscripts from Abu Nabbut's library, but in an inexplicable way. We do not know if these 13 manuscripts that ended up in Gaza were part of the Islamic Library of Jaffa. The absence of the just shown stamp on these books is not significant in this regard, as the stamp was certainly put on them after 1948, as the use of Arabic and Hebrew in the stamp indicates. What remains are short notes in At-Tab'a's hand on most of the 13 manuscripts, with their date of arrival in Gaza. And what these short notes actually reveal is that the 13 manuscripts that ended up in Gaza did not come in one batch, but in at least 2 batches. A single manuscript made its way to the National Library of Israel in Jerusalem. The manuscript in question was, according to the inventory book of the library, bought in 1955 from a certain Dr. Goldstein. There are no manuscript notes revealing further insights about the history of this particular manuscript. However, today Jerusalem, or more precisely Abu Dis, hosts other manuscripts of Abu Nabbut. From the manuscripts of the Islamic Library of Jaffa, I found 19 in the catalogs of the Center for Heritage Revival and Islamic Research. This institution has, according to their catalogs, published so far at least another 8 manuscripts. That is a total of, again, at least 27 manuscripts formerly part of Abu Nabbut's library. This institution is furthermore so far largely neglected, but certainly if not the major player in the more recent reshuffling of Palestinian manuscripts and libraries. Now, a corpus of 146 manuscripts of formerly at least 538 books of a historical library is to a certain extent a fairly representative sample size. What does the more recent history of these 146 manuscripts tell us? The most salient point about the 20th century history of Abu Nabbut's manuscripts is its decisively local nature. Here we have a library that apparently remained under the radar of international manuscript traders and book collectors. Instead, it remained within a radius of approximately 44 miles of Jaffa. It is telling that among the big European libraries Boris Liebrenz has meticulously searched, not even one has a manuscript formerly owned by Abu Nabbut. Now, there's certainly a chance that this situation will change, and books formerly endowed by Abu Nabbut pop up in collections in Europe, in the United States, or elsewhere. The chance, however, is arguably small, and it is much more likely that Egyptian libraries or libraries in other bordering countries keep books formerly owned by Abu Nabbut. So far, however, we see not a single sign of a large-scale book drain regarding this very library, and the history of the corpus is thus conspicuously local. What, then, is the peculiar place of Abu Nabbut's library in the history of the region? Now, the title of this lecture suggests something temporal and something typical or taxonomical, last and Mamluk. Claiming something first or last in history is, of course, risky and prone to be corrected rather soon. Still, as far as I know, Abu Nabbut was the last Mamluk, the last manumitted military slave who served as a high-profile governor and found a library in Ottoman Palestine, and arguably in the wider region of Ottoman Bilad Sham. Now, asking for the type of library is also tricky for several reasons. Amongst others, the types of libraries we make up today are modern constructs with no terminological or conceptual parallel in history. The concept of Mamluk history simply didn't exist back then, neither in what is known as the Mamluk period, nor in the Ottoman period. What is it then that we are actually after? What do we want to know when asking for different types of libraries? What we are really after, I think, is the intention behind and the function of book ownership and library foundations. We are trying to make sense of why historical actors choose to invest time and considerable amounts of money to build up book collections for themselves and others. The labels we use today, be they Sultanic Library, private or personal library, public library, scholarly library, family library, prestige library, are thus rather heuristics than definite expressions of their respective founders' intents. Now, what is a Mamluk library? The term Mamluk, manumitted military slave, has been used rather generously in Middle Eastern studies, most prominently to denote a polity ruling in Syria and Egypt from the mid-13th to the early 16th century. The label Mamluk to refer to almost any historical phenomenon that happened in that period has been rightfully and forcefully called into question in recent years, most prominently by Jo van Steenbergen. Now, why do I still see value in calling a library heuristically Mamluk? Calling a library Mamluk is not meant as a constant reminder of the real or imagined military slave background of its founder. It is rather meant to place a library into a tradition of library building, a tradition of high and low profile actors who came as soldiers and ended up as military and political leaders. Throughout the history of the Middle East, we can see various Mamluks investing their money in building libraries. The purposes may have varied here and there, but one vital function was to tie scholars to their households to legitimize their power. As part of the madrasa within the mosque, the library of Abu Nabbut in Jaffa was a major element in the religious and cultural component of Abu Nabbut's endowment complex. Jaffa was, as Acre before al-Jazzar, a small harbor town with no vivid cultural life, and as far as we know, there was no scholarly scene in Jaffa. With the building of the mosque madrasa library compound, Abu Nabbut thus tried to kickstart the religious and scholarly life of the town, probably trying to attract scholars to move to Jaffa. None other than these scholars are the ones who take over the task of building libraries in the next century. After the beginning of the early 19th century, that is after Abu Nabbut, we can detect this very change in the bookish landscape of Bilad al-Sham. Starting in the 18th century and then with more force in the 19th century, most libraries founded particularly in Palestine are what we today call family libraries, that are libraries backed up with a family endowment. These libraries were established by scholarly and notable families. In Jerusalem, these are most famously the Khalidiyya, but also the Abu Lutf, al-Khalili, al-Alami, Nashashibi, Budayri, al-Ajami, and so on. Other Palestinian cities saw similar developments. In Jaffa and Gaza, as well as in Jerusalem, the Dajani family had several members collecting books. In Nablus, we have Haj Nimr and the Al-Sufan. Some of their libraries made it until today. We do have some family libraries extant, some even in the original library settings, for example, the Khalidiyya. Now, this is in contrast to Mamluk libraries, who all disappeared, or rather got dispersed within new contexts. Now, I want to close with a final thought about what the history of Abu Nabbut's library contributes to the history of libraries and cultural history of Ottoman Palestine more broadly. The growing number of studies on Palestinian book collections, and this lecture series is certainly a major outlet for these studies, is a very much welcomed and long overdue development. In research on Ottoman Palestine, Jerusalem looms very large, even to a distorting extent, overshadowing the history of other Palestinian towns and regions. The al-Jazzar Library project, with its research on Acre and my research on Abu Nabbut's library in Jaffa, are thus helping to put Jerusalem and Jerusalemite libraries and book history in perspective, and show that once we widen our scopes, we can see that collecting books was a phenomenon taking place in towns and cities besides Jerusalem, and that we can and have to cast our nets wider to see the bigger picture relating the culture of books and libraries in Palestine. And with this, I want to close my thoughts on Abu Nabbut's library for today. Thank you very much for your attention. You're muted.
This is very interesting. I mean, I'm sort of attracted to the subject of al-Qaf. And I thought I heard you say that there were different kinds of waqfs. Like the Khalidiyya library has a kind of a family waqf. And the other ones you were talking about in Jaffa have something like, the books were the properties, right? It was the property in I don't know what the Khalidi family waqf consists of in terms of properties, but was it the books that were the property?
Well, Abu Nabbut owned half of Jaffa and environs, infrastructure, mills around Jaffa. The harbor also helped him. I don't know if he owned the harbor. No, he certainly didn't own the harbor, but he owned khans, souks, and so on. So this complex was not somehow only limited to the books. He owned half of Jaffa and yeah, endowed it to exert influence and yeah.
So do you have waqfiyas as opposed to?
Yeah, well, we don't have. I mean, waqfiya is a term that is used rather generously. We have this multiple document manuscript I was talking about, which is not the original waqfiya, but copies of original waqfiyas. But I have not found so far original waqfiyas. I mean, Istanbul is rich, as we all know, and probably there are waqfiyas in Istanbul, maybe in Jerusalem, maybe in Abu Dis. But so far, the main source on the Waqf of Abu Nabbut is this multiple document manuscript consisting only of copies of waqfiyas and later additions to the waqfiyas.
So there are no waqfiyas in the sijilat?
Well, the sijilat, I was not able to see all the sijilat from Jaffa, unfortunately. There's something, I mean, interestingly, in Jerusalem, I mean, there was a court in Jaffa, which was also used, and there are many entries in the sijilat, but to record the endowment, he certainly, I mean, didn't choose, but he had to go to Jerusalem, which apparently had a supervising role of other courts. So in the sijilat of Jerusalem, I found waqfiyas of Abu Nabbut.
Good luck.
Yeah. Thanks.
We have a couple of questions. Let me see if I can. This is Amina Al-Bandari. Thank you for this interesting lecture. I might have missed some of it due to bad internet connection, but can you give us an idea of the titles that you were able to trace to the library?
Well, so far I have not made one of these nice charts where you can see the different genre, but I mean, it's nothing, I would say so far very spectacular. It's mostly fiqh, I would say. You have some history, you have some adab, you mostly I mean, the titles I found so far are Arabic books. There's some Persian, some Ottoman Turkish stuff. But I mean, yeah, the ones I found so far are rather not very spectacular, not very old manuscripts. I mean, compared to Acre, al-Jazzar, who owned famously the Fihris of Ibn al-Nadim and other books, Abu Nabbut, yeah, wasn't able to find something I would today find would call spectacular. I plan to publish the corpus and also an edition of the inventory in the future. So yeah, maybe you can check that out once it's published. Yeah.
Okay, I have a couple of questions from Adam Mestayan. He had sort of the similar question I had about the endowed assets, if they're not the books. But maybe you've said a few things, but he has another question. Was Jaffa under Egyptian occupation in the 1830s? And if so, does it have anything to do with the library?
Yes, it was an occupation, and I have not found out if this somehow had an influence on the library. I haven't found any manuscript formerly owned or endowed by Abu Nabbut in any Egyptian library, but I was not able to really search Egyptian libraries so far. I mean, that's certainly, and that's why I also said that Egypt might be the #1 on the list. It would make sense to look in Egypt, not because there are a lot of Arabic books, but because of the occupation in the 30s. But I haven't found any hint that the Egyptians took manuscripts from Jaffa or any other Palestinian town to Egypt. But that's certainly one thing one should look for, and that would be a very obvious explanation. Yeah.
So Ramzi Tadros, thank you. A marginal question. Are there any studies about Christian Arabic libraries in Palestine in the Ottoman period?
I am not aware of Christian libraries, but certainly there were. And also in Jaffa. In Jaffa, you had monasteries, different monasteries. And they had libraries, but I'm not aware. I only saw this mentioned, I think, in European travelogues. But I'm not, unfortunately, aware of any study about Palestinian Christian libraries.
Okay, Yara Sakfalhait. Thank you for this insightful lecture. Building on Professor Messick's comment, were there differences in the terms governing the status of the books as waqfs and those that dealt with buildings, land, etc., within Abu Nabbut's endowment?
I'm not sure if I really understand that question. I mean, it's a very typical book endowment note stating that this is for the books is endowed for those who are seeking knowledge, and they shouldn't be taken out of their location. That's the endowment note on most of the books, what it's saying. So yeah, I'm not sure if I can really say something more, because the waqfiyas of the copies of the waqfiyat of the other buildings here endowed, I haven't really looked into that in detail so far. So yeah.
So Fatima Mudarres, could you explain the name of the library? Is it related to a region or just an enslaved soldier? I do not speak Arabic.
Okay, so I mean, it's the name of the library, as I called it so far, Abu Nabbut's library mostly, is something I haven't found in the sources. That's what I made up of. It's Kutub Khane in the madrasa of the Great Mosque, usually in the sources. Doesn't have a more attractive name. And I mean, the question, again, I can't really say. I mean, it's the last Mamluk library, if you are referring to that, the name of the lecture today is referring to the nature of the library as I see it, to the tradition of library foundations, which was very prominent in Ottoman, Mamluk, and earlier Bilad al-Sham and Egypt, which came to an end in the 19th century, and I argue that it came to an end with Abu Nabbut. So it's not a region, Mamluk, it's not a region, it's it's the personal background of the library founder.
Okay, Ramzi Tadros is back. Did you have information about the origin of the books and manuscripts? Local copyists from Jerusalem, etc.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I invite anyone to check out the al-Jazzar University Library website and see their reproductions. They are not really great. They are from the 1980s, microfilm, black and white. So I can't read all the manuscript notes. What I've found so far in terms of where Abu Nabbut got his books from is in the Sigilat from Jaffa. There is a estate inventory of a scholar who died and who didn't have any family member in Jaffa, and Abu Nabbut served as his representative. And amongst the estate inventory, we find books, a very small number. Of this small number, there's only one title. The other ones are dashed, more or less. Yeah. the title that is in the inventory, in the state inventory, also appears in my corpus. So there's a chance that Abu Nabbut bought or took some books from estate that was auctioned off or sold from deceased men and women in Jaffa and probably also in Jerusalem and other cities. Now there's one other cluster of books with a stamp or ownership mark of a certain, what was his name? I forgot. There's one book owner who pops up, I think, on 20 manuscripts. And there's also one manuscript in the corpus that was copied by this person. And the colophon of this manuscript is dated and it's prior to Abu Nabbut's library. So I think that, yeah, there's one cluster of books he might have also like bought, maybe confiscated, who knows, the library of this one person. But it's, yeah, speculation. But as long as I don't have better reproductions or see the original manuscripts, I can't really like ascertain anything more about the origins of the manuscripts, like how Abu Nabbut came to own or buy these manuscripts. But that's certainly an interesting question, because obviously Abu Nabbut is not the start of the books in his library, but only assembled books from other libraries too. So the reshuffling of libraries is an ongoing thing. Yeah.
So you, I mean, I was interested in the notion of the types of libraries. And we have the family library, which is the kind of, a lot of them. But then this you're giving, I think you were trying to make some kind of analysis of the type of this Mamluk last library. That was a kind of books of power. These are kind of books of persons who were sort of illustrating their authority in their collection of books. Was that something like you were trying to get at?
Yeah, well, on the one hand, I would say, yeah, they assembled books to show that they were powerful men, but I think at least equally important is for them was to attract scholars to their realms. To al-Jazzar was trying to do it in Acre. Abu Nabbut was trying to do that in Jaffa, trying to attract scholars to their towns and yeah, trying to get them into their household to legitimize their power. I mean, that's something we see also in earlier periods. Yeah, people or rulers trying to co-opt scholars to, yeah, serve also as an intermediate between the population and the ruling elite.
I have one sort of a question. I don't know if it's really a question, but you mentioned somebody named Tijani.
Dajani.
Huh?
Dajani.
Oh, so I was thinking we're in a tariqa and something like that. But
no, sorry.
Because I remember walking in Acre once and stumbling upon the headquarters of the Shadiliya.
Yeah.
You know, they're and all the graves of the leaders. I mean, it's like amazing. So Sufism wasn't part of the story here.
I mean, Sufism was certainly a major trend in Palestine in that period. But I haven't found any clue that Abu Nabbut himself was A, Sufi, and B, trying to attract specifically Sufi scholars. So, I mean, the whole region was steeped with Sufi culture and scholars, and I mean, Sufism was, I mean, the trend. So it was certainly in the air everywhere, but there's nothing specifically Sufi I could find in the sources.
But are there specific zawiyas around?
I mean, yeah, there certainly were in Jaffa, but it's not something that he tried to support, as far as I see. There's no certain
Or he didn't try to prohibit it either.
Not as far as I know, he didn't know. Yeah, I mean, he wouldn't have made a lot of I don't know if you can go to bed lucky if you try to prevent Sufism in the 19th century, 18th, 19th century. Yeah. No, but yeah, Sufism is certainly a major part of Palestinian religious history in this period. Yeah.
Has anybody written that history?
James Graham, I think is his name. Graham, let me hear. Twilight of the Saints, Everyday Religion and Ottoman Syria and Palestine. I can send you the title later. Twilight of the Saints, Everyday Religion in Ottoman Syria and Palestine, 2016.
Good, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
UNA function isn't, I don't know whether it's what's going on, but. So I think you said in one of your, on the place that you sent us that sort of text about what the talk was going to be about, and you talked about the sigilet, and I just wondered, oh, these are of court records, or are these general? Because there were a lot of administrations that had their own sigilet systems. They weren't just for courts. And but if it's in a court, it could be other things like the waqfiyat and things like that. But there were, I think, a lot of administrative sigilet of different types for different parts of the Ottoman institutional apparatus, which was very, the Beit al-Mal and on. But so where are these? Where did you found these sigilet at the court? Is a building or something like that, or what?
Online. I haven't been on the spot, and I have to say I don't even know where the sigilat of Jaffa today are. I contacted the court in Jaffa with no answer. There are reproductions in Amman, which you cannot read. I mean, you have to go there to see them on a microfilm machine. You can't order reproductions. I found reproductions online, but I have to say I don't really know where they are. They are newer. The newer volumes are also in some, I think in Haifa and in Jerusalem, in Israeli state archives, newer reproductions. I mean, not newer reproductions, but reproductions of newer volumes. The very early volumes, I don't know where they are. But they are certainly court records, the sigilat, not other administrative sigilat, but they contain administrative stuff. As often you find administrative stuff. So, for example, you have firmanat from the Sultan copied into the court records in Ottoman Turkish, sprinkled in between the day-to-day work of the Qadi.
I think the microfilms are very hard to read.
Yes.
I mean, it would be nice if it could have them digitized in some way that would make them legible or make them more accessible.
Yes, I mean that's certainly would be a major step forward in not only in my research but in history writing of Ottoman Palestine. I mean, there's a lot of stories to be told that remain untold because of access issues and of documents, manuscripts, and so on that are somewhere kept in different institutional settings and not made public. The region would certainly be I think that there should be funding and there should be very secure settings for the sigilat, for other documents online, because I mean there's so much to say about the region that is unsaid. But yeah, it would certainly be interesting to see the originals and have access.
I think I've seen a couple of sigilet from Jerusalem, from the Jerusalem court.
Yeah.
That have been indexed.
Yeah.
They haven't been digitized. They're not necessarily more legible, but they have been read by some group in Jerusalem. And that's amazing, because you end up with, you can find the different judges, you can find the different villages or quarters in Jerusalem that are being discussed, or the different topics. It's so helpful.
Yes, they are digitized. They are not, I think even almost all of them are digitized, and you have this very good series which you were just talking about, indexes. You also have some volumes that are edited, actually, not only indexed, but edited.
Oh.
But as the sigillat from Jerusalem are the most copious sigillat from the whole region, which are really, I mean, there's very few breaks from the early, I think 1524 until 1920 something. That would be a major task to edit all of them, right? On index all of them. So couple of hundred sigillat are extant, and yeah, that's really a lucky case for Jerusalem to have this many sigillat. And it's yeah, of course also most welcome development that they are now being indexed and some edited and made public and made available. Yeah, but there's, I mean, again, Jerusalem is looms large, which is rightfully so, but also, yeah, other towns have their own history, and that is, yeah, interesting histories which remain mostly obscure, and should find dedicated scholars and researchers to write their histories. Yeah.
You know, I had a sort of a fantasy of having students being able to get access to sigillat to study their own history. That was, you know, and with the Khalidi and other libraries digitized, so you have the manuscripts there for students if they can read Arabic, and then you also have the court records. That's a good combination.
Yes, it is.
And I was hoping to find some people maybe at Berzit, and I think there probably are people there who could teach those. You know, it's not that bad a deal if the things are legible.
Yeah,
and it could be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, specifically for Palestinian, for Jerusalemite libraries, there is this Encyclopedia Palestinica by Mohammed Roche. I don't know, 20 volumes or so, rather expensive. And there's one volume which is exclusively about manuscripts and libraries. You can find, I don't know, a couple of hundreds pictures of entries in sigillat only concerning libraries or book ownership in Jerusalem. So the history of libraries in Jerusalem, there are books written about that, but there's certainly material for many PhDs and probably also for large scale databases, because you just find these whole estate inventory, like estate inventories from the 16th century until the 20th century, full of titles. I mean, it's very hard to make sense out of a list of solely titles, and you have the name of the previous owner who deceased, but you have a couple of thousand titles moving from owner to owner and this is recorded in the sigillat. So the history of libraries in Palestine, and specifically in Jerusalem, can will largely remain or rely on the sigillat. So yeah,
Interesting.
can be used by many students.
We have a last question. This is Ramzi Tadros again. Please, is there any collective project to synthesize the history of libraries, or just to access to the studies, just to get access to the studies?
Oh, I think there is no synthesis so far, and I think there is a reason for it, because I think the history of libraries in that region is rather young, and there are many individual projects going on which have to come to an end before you can see the bigger picture and synthesize these single histories. but that would be a major work for people maybe like Boris Liebrenz or Konrad Hirschler, who are the experts in this field, to write synthesis of these library histories. And access to these studies, I mean, academia.edu, and I mean, you can drop me an email and I can send you PDFs of the studies I have. But there's no one website or so where you can download all the studies that have been published on library history. Yeah, that would be an interesting website. So
we will look forward to that website. And right now, we'll just thank you for a nice lecture and responding to these questions. I mean, I think it's a very interesting topic, and it's recognizably difficult.
Yeah.
Same time.
Well, thank you again for the invitation and for the discussion to everyone.
Thanks.